views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
The black vote made a difference in the 2008 presidential election, but the question is, what difference will it make in the year 2020? Coming up on this edition of Perspectives, we understand it's not just about presidential elections, but the primaries as well. Well, as we continue our series on race relations here on the show, our friend and political correspondent Joyce Johnson will be joining me now to talk a little bit more about what can we expect as we get closer towards November and the power of the black vote. Stay with us. Perspectives starts now.
What's on your mind? Express what's on your mind. What's on your mind?
Anything relevant to life, you bring it to the table. Whether you make a move solo or a movement with a stable. No fables, just speak on your decisions. Cause in the long run, it's your voice, your views, your vision. Keeping it real with many messages for you to know. This ain't radio, but DJ runs the show. Entertainment, he rocks it. Politics, he locks it. The host with the most would handle any topic. Don't forget to share your perspective with shines of light. Cause it might make a difference in someone else's life.
Make a difference in someone's life. Express what's in your heart and your mind. Share your perspective.
What's your perspective? Let 'em know.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Perspectives. I am Daren Jaime. Of course, we thank you for joining us. As always, you can watch Perspectives every week here on BronxNet Channel 67. If you have Verizon Files, that will be Channel 33 or anytime on the web at bronxnet.org. And of course, we invite you to stay connected on all of our social media platforms. How do you do that? Well, BronxNet Perspectives. And of course, you can always stay connected to me personally on Facebook. That would be Daren C. Jaime on my professional page, and DC Jaime 23 on Twitter and Instagram. Well, you're watching another show, and we are continuing our conversation on race relations in America. And my next guest has spent much time, many years in New York City government, not only in the New York City government, but a wide range of leadership, including the offices of Manhattan Borough President, the New York City Comptroller, and in the New York City Chancellor's office. She's an experienced political campaign operative, and she's also a former candidate for Congress, as well as the city council districts in Manhattan. She's also served as the elected Democratic district leader, but most importantly, she is a true friend of the show. And I'm pleased to be joined by Joyce Johnson here on the show. And Joyce, good to have you.
Thank you. Good to see you again. It's been many months.
Well, certainly as we have you here, just want to take the time to say thank you for joining us. But listen, we've been talking a lot about the black vote. And so if you can and will, give us a little bit about, from your perspective, what it looks like as we move towards 2020. COVID-19 is really real. And the thought process is, how effective will the black vote be?
Well, I've seen something that I've not seen probably in 4 decades, at least 3. At least 3. And that's a fired up in Black America that I was in my political life. You know, I used to lament so much that all the time on the street, and otherwise I would hear resoundingly, my vote does not matter. What difference does this make? You're all the same. I would leave a campaign trail with my shoulders rounded, feeling like folks just don't care. They don't understand that all we have is the power of our vote. I think it's the circumstances of this presidency. It's what we have seen in terms of the presidency, 1, some of the administration acts, 2, policies, procedures, appointments, you name it, that would make anyone hair stand on their head. And certainly if you know anything about democracy or the will of the people, none of that has happened in the last 3.5 years. And so that, coupled with the current environment of police relations, I tell you, it has been like a tsunami that has hit the American public, the wall. And I think, if anything, we are now woke. We are absolutely woke.
And you use the word woke, but the question is whether or not people will go to sleep. And the reason I say that is there's conversation going on. As we're watching, New York, of course, is on the other side of the curve. As we're watching now in other states across America, they're now starting to close down. They're starting to get to the place where doors are actually closing. We know it took us a few months just to get to where we are today. If you go a few months out from now, you're actually pressing into election season. Some people have said it's been a conspiracy to get people behind closed doors, keep them behind closed doors until the place where election time comes around, and possibly when it comes to African American voters, doing something called voter suppression legally. What have you heard about that, and do you agree with this theory?
Well, I certainly do because unfortunately, I believe we are in an environment where the other side, Donald Trump, the president, wants to win by any means necessary. And when I say any means necessary, that's a hard thing to say because to put people's lives in jeopardy. I mean, I thought something was amiss when we called to open up and curiously, not curiously, demand to let's open up the beauty parlors and the barber shops and we know these are places, while others too. These are not only uh, community occasions. I mean, we are very. That's where we go to do our things on Saturdays before church and all of that, and to open up a lot of places where disproportionately the workers were going to be people of color. So yeah, I thought, I mean, it sounds somewhat crazy, but an environment with a crazy person in the White House, in my mind, and this is nonpartisan, but let's call it as it is. It's a psychology um, that it wants to win by any means necessary. So I think that I was certainly concerned about that. That no one wants to die. No one wants to put themselves in jeopardy for the vote. People have done it before, but this is certainly different. We're all fearful, but it is not only. But when I saw the turnout in Wisconsin, the standing in lines and all of that, it says that somehow, not somehow, it's when people, and I don't know what I would, no, I do know what I would have done. I would have been in line also. So folks stood in line hours on end, ballots going wrong, everything you can go wrong, but still the will of the people willed out and they stayed in line and made a difference. I think it is one of these things that happens in human nature. Your back's against the wall and there's nowhere else to go but stand still and go forward, go back. And I think
Yeah.
this is where we are. Um, and that's frankly for all of Americans who see the need for a change. But I warn people, and you're hinting to it, the playbook, particularly in some states, in southern states, and some battleground states, it has always been from day one to suppress the black vote. Ours is the most reliable vote on the Democratic side. We vote 92%. And if you can cut into that in any measure, you can win an election and arguably steal an election. Voter suppression, look what happened. Closing in Kentucky, in the Louisville area, 600,000 congressional district, 600,000 people, and one polling site, and yet folks came out big time in Louisville and also in Lexington, two parts of Kentucky predominantly minority or heavily minority. So much so that the candidate Charles Booker, coming off the primary night, was ahead of the person who is now going to be the Democratic nominee. So I think when I say woke, it's like you can't go any further back. So let's go forward, even in the face of voter suppression, still voting purges. We want to vote by mail. I want that for the sake of safety. I worry about the fact that we have no no sense that the votes are going to be counted, particularly if you know where votes are coming from a particular area of town of the state. They cannot be counted, but we are nonetheless going to do our duty and give it our best shot.
Yeah. I want to ask the question about Joe Biden for a minute. A lot of conversations been had about him. We do understand that he will put a woman in the vice president's ticket. The question is, will that woman be of African American descent? And if he does choose an African American woman to be his running mate as vice president, what does that do in terms of bringing out the black vote? Will this be something that could be considerably a huge factor?
I think it can be because look at what having a black man, Barack Obama, on the ballot and as president did in 2008. Historic, the same kind of lines that we're talking about we're seeing in primary elections for blacks or just in general, the turnout in our communities because the stakes are so high. So the point is, I think absolutely so. But if he does not, if it's a woman but not of color, I think with the stakes are still as high in terms of the need to change the presidency. And so we've seen enough in policy procedures. We've seen it's when you think your vote doesn't matter, when they put every barrier in the world in place to make sure that you can't. It doesn't take a light bulb to turn on to say, hey, my vote does matter, and particularly at this time.
Yeah.
So I think it will help. And let's say this: not only all the are women being considered, not only may they be African American, but they also happen to be outstanding public servants. And certainly, I believe each and every one of them are prepared and ready to be vice president if and president one day.
All right, we're going to take a quick break with Joyce. We'll be back. We've got more show continuing our talk about the black vote as it gets to the year 2020. More of our conversation will return right here on Perspectives. And we are back here on Perspectives. Daren Jaime here with you. And I'm so glad to have you share with us as we are talking about 2020's election. It seems like it's far way away, but the truth of the matter is just a few months away. In a few months, America will determine who the next president of the United States will be and also where things land up on the senatorial side, in the House, as well as in the Senate. So listen, Joyce Johnson, our guest, talking with us here. And Joyce, as I was sharing, the presidential election, very important. Let's also talk about the House and the Senate, two equal places where legislative bodies, where a lot of things can happen and a lot of difference can be made.
The lessons of 2008, where we elected Obama in tremendous numbers and outturn, and then we stayed home in 2010 when we lost the Congress, we lost our Senate, we lost many state houses, state legislatures, secretaries of state, who then became the architects of voter suppression, which we're still dealing with. And so we have come to know that number one, you cannot sleep any election. The president is but one of three parts of government, and we may have our flagship in that part, but there are two other flags to carry: the Congress and the Senate. And so I think through we have learned lessons. We know our responsibility. We know much more about the three branches of government. We know who does what. We know that secretaries of state are responsible for the voting process in the state. So it matters who that person is. We know now to vote for each and every person on a ballot when the opportunity becomes, and never not vote. Our lives depend on it.
Yeah, our lives do matter. And I think that when you talk about our lives mattering, that's what exactly we see coming out in protest. I want to take a second to get your voice on that, because we're seeing massive protests, a protest about police brutality, protests that Black Lives Matter, and really uh, laying it out there for people to know that in this season that police brutality won't be tolerated, and the deaths of unarmed, innocent African American men will not be tolerated. Much to say while COVID is still going on. So people are literally risking their lives by coming out and protesting. Do you think we're seeing the same kind of thing at the polls where I've saw somebody say once before, listen, I'm willing to risk my life to vote this man out of office? Do you think we'll see that?
I do. I really do. And let's face it, 50 years ago, there were African Americans around the country in the civil rights era in the South who would protest, beaten by police, dogs, dogs put on them, put in jail. Probably the same kind of murders that are going on now, but we didn't know about it because we didn't have videos and there wasn't the media, attention to it and all of that. But it's like how we can't go any further back. And yes, is it worth my living to live in fear against some of the suppression, ill treatment, the lack of opportunities? Is life worth it? No. Let me get in the fight. And I think that's where we are. But in addition to that, there is, and all of this has happened with George Floyd, that America is seeing, a lot of white America is seeing what we have known for decades. And it's inhumane, it's wrong, it's unjust, and the notion of protect and serve is not 100%. Those, I remind people, and this is where we once again talk about our legislator and who we have in office. The FBI did a study some 10, 12 years ago that white supremacists have infiltrated law enforcement throughout the country. One, you look at what some of the wars that we fought, that the police forces around the country were allowed then to buy these at much reduced cost, militarized armaments. You look at some of these guys out in the street. These are folks that you would see in our desert and Desert Storm with the caliber of armament, the equipment, and all of that. It is not policing. It is armed. It is an armed army against the people in front of you. And so I think, what's that? Fannie Lou Hamer. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I
Right.
think America and much of white America too is woke about that. And this is not the country we want to portray. We have lost so much in standing, but for all the right reasons. And I think it's enough is enough. So yeah, I want to say we're darn mad.
Yeah. Well, we say enough is enough. And I'm like, for some people, enough is beyond enough. All right. Well, we're going to leave it there with Joyce for a second. We're going to come back, take a quick break, come back after a break, I should say. And we'll be back with more with Joyce as we talk about the vote 2020.
built a media network for you.
BronxNet TV.
Come learn in your new state-of-the-art studios at Lehman College.
At Mercy College.
And coming soon to the South Bronx in the Hub.
Inspire with your stories, culture, history.
Your Bronx on BronxNet.
Engage with us.
Connect with us at your channels and at BronxNet.tv.
Learn, engage, inspire. BronxNet TV.
From the Bronx
to the world.
BronxNet.
And we're back here on Perspectives. Daren Jaime here with you. The topic of conversation, Vote 2020. Our guest, political strategist Joyce Johnson, who has been with us and is sharing some great information in regards to Vote 2020 and giving us her perspective. Joyce, I'll begin with this. As we head towards the polls in 2020, a lot to pay attention to, particularly people coming out to the polls in voting. And there's some things that we should know as voters. And so I want, if you will, because I know that you worked, with in elections, talk to us about some of the things that people need to know and put in perspective as we gear up towards the election day.
Well, but we always tell people, go and register to vote. They do, and they may or may not get a voter registration card. And if they do, they'll take it to the polls, fine. But most times, if you vote regularly, you don't have to. But in these election times, given what we have to make sure of, as we have seen in recent elections, it is not enough to say, I registered to vote, I have my card. You may have to, before you go to vote, you may have to call your board of election to find out, indeed, if you are still registered. Why? Because there have been massive voter purges, as there were some over 300,000 in Georgia in the face of Stacey Abrams' race. You may have to find out, where your polling site was. There's a polling site around the street corner from me. I voted for there for the last 30 years. You may need to call to see where this is my address. Where am I going to vote? Why? Because polling sites have changed. So what you have to do, in addition to carry your card, you've got to make sure you have to have that access. Yes, I'm on the rolls. Yes, this is my polling site. And do the polling site piece in early advance. If in one community you find out everybody's saying in the church, say, look, my polling site changes. It's now 15 miles away. What was a mile away is I always vote. 15 miles away, it may not be that important to me. So we have to protect our own vote. And so those are things that the community must do. Nonprofit organizations, the churches, all fired up around that.
If a person gets to the polls, they find themselves being turned away. Their name doesn't appear, typical stuff that we hear. What advice do you give?
Tell them, I want a provisional ballot. I want a provisional ballot. There's always a backup. It could, by some chance, your name is not on, and you will say, look, I have always voted at this polling site. I've never missed a vote. And so I want a provisional ballot. And then the Board of Election is duty bound to, accept that ballot. And if in fact they are wrong, that ballot is counted. And that's just another measure. All of these. So thank you for mentioning that too. In other words, I will not be turned away. If I voted in the past, there is no reason why I come this day, November 3rd, 2020, and I'm no longer on the polls. There's no mention of my name. It's going to be a provisional ballot. And the name of the person who said I was not on the polls, let me see the book. And you may call it bravado, but this is the one great equalizer we have in the United States of America, our vote. And if it wasn't the great equalizer, then why are folks putting a lot of time and energy into making sure that we cannot exercise that vote? That's our power. Let's use it.
It's our power. It's our right.
It's
important that people exercise their right to vote. I want to get this question in here about the primaries. We just saw some primaries here in New York State. Any idea as to this giving us some sort of feel for what things might look towards in 2020? I saw a huge congressional race where Elliot Engel unseated in his primary seat. Pretty telling.
And Carolyn Maloney and others as well. Here's what I've noticed. Now, I'm a Democratic operative, Democratic candidate, a staunch Democrat, Democratic district leader. We have a one-party system here in New York, and it's the Democratic Party. And I have to say, and I don't care who hears it, because I have no axe to grind but to tell the truth. We can be as voter suppressive as any other me party and whatever. We had the power of incumbency is powerful. When I ran for several times, Congress, it's how dare you, run against an incumbent. That in itself is a suppressive means and statement. And so we are rejecting that, as people should, as new philosophies are coming out, positions, and we have a right to, stand for election competition, and so folks are doing that, and I'm glad. I think it's healthy. It's healthy for the system, and I believe that every candidate should stand for election, meaning have opposition, and we should not just, a decade goes along and you're just automatically, reelected without people don't have a choice. We want a choice. And if you are good as you are, you'll be reelected.
We wouldn't be talking about AOC if that was the case. But the fact is, we're talking about her, and that was much of the reason why she primaried and she won.
Exactly. And I encourage folks, because they'll say to me, well, you think I should? I said, why shouldn't you? The other person did way back then. They did as well. So I think competition is healthy. It makes us a better party. Plus, for younger folks.
Yeah, and more people are coming out, right? And they're joining. I should say not joining, but political office. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. There are more people who are actually seeking political office at a younger age. Talk to us about that, because we are seeing some demographic shifts where people are putting their name in the hat real early.
Well, why not? It's your constitutional right. If you're 21 years old, you can run for office. And why not? Let the people decide. It's not a function of will I win? I mean, everybody wants to win, but you get your name out there. You let folks know where your positions are. And I'm absolutely encouraging of that. There must be the next generation. So what do we wait till they're 60 to train them, or to dare to, raise your hand to say that I want to? I say, whenever you think the time is ready for yourself, present yourself well, with good operations, and let the people decide. And the people want choice. Choices.
Yeah, they want choice for sure. They do want choice, and there's gonna be a choice in November of 2020. And Joyce, thank you so much for coming and sharing with us here on Perspectives. Gotta leave it there, but as always, as we get closer to November, you're back in the seat.
Anytime, love to.
All right.
Take care. Don't forget to vote, everybody. Don't forget to register, and don't let them turn your way.
That's right. Joyce Johnson with some final words right there. Listen, I am Daren Jaime. I want to thank you for watching us here on Perspectives. Listen, until the next time we meet, stay safe and share your perspective with somebody else. You just don't know. It might make a difference in someone else's life. Take care.